Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 mini-series with the Los Angeles Angels. And we have just completed a very eventful first season in Los Angeles, a 64-98 record, last place in the American League West. We were one game better than the Angels in 2024, but we certainly did not make a lot of progress on the field. One thing we did make a lot of progress on, though, was completely gutting this roster. As the offseason gets underway, we potentially have around $95 million of money available to spend, and that is because we have cut this franchise at the major league level, at least, down to the bone. Over the course of the first 6 or 7 months of us being in charge of this organization, traded away the difficult contract of Anthony Rendon. Unfortunately, we were only able to get 30% of his contract off his books, but given that he's hurt until early next season, and we don't have a lot of hopes for him being productive then, felt it made sense to move on from him. Also, over the course of the year, traded away Tyler Anderson, Jorge Soler, Luis Rengifo, Travis d'Arnaud, 95% of Yusei Kikuchi's contract, Yoan Moncada, and then most notably, we did trade away Mike Trout and his entire contract, 5.5 years remaining when we traded him away, 5 years remaining now at 35 plus million a year for a player in his mid-30s who appears to be breaking down physically. The cornerstone of the trade for Trout was we got Adley Rutschman from the Baltimore Orioles. They were looking for an upgrade in center field from Cedric Mullins. They're a team that is a contender over the near to medium term, most likely. And they also have a outstanding young catching prospect in their organization in Samuel Basayo. So trade kind of made sense for both us and for us and for them. And Rutschman was very productive with us. Put up a 1.6 WAR for us in 163 at-bats. Batting average was only 245, but still put up a 120 WRC plus and a 4 WAR on the season. And he will, heading into his second to last arbitration eligible season, where he's set to make around $11 million, likely be our catcher for the next 2 seasons, and hopefully well beyond that. When we look at what this team did on the field, we've talked already about the very poor overall record, 64-98. Was an extremely strange season, though. March, April, and May, we were almost a 500 team. August and September, we were only a game below 500. But during June and July, we were historically awful, going a combined 11-41 in those 2 months. And obviously, those brutal performances in the middle of the season ruined any hope we had of even being borderline respectable. When all was said and done, we ranked 13th in the American League in runs scored and dead last, 15th in runs allowed. Not really any particular strengths anywhere. We were 5th in the league in stolen bases. That was the best we were in any type of offensive or running category. And we were somehow 3rd in the league in strikeouts for our pitching staff. But we have torn this thing down to the bone. And now it is time for us to start building it back up. And one other thing that we are going to be building back up is our coaching staff, because we have also just wielded a mighty axe, fired our pitching coach, hitting coach, and our bench coach. We promoted Bo Porter from first base coach to become our new bench coach. So we've got offers outstanding for 3 new coaches at the major league level, And it's even uglier in the minor leagues, where we turned over every coach in our minor league system except for hitting coach Ray Willie Gomez, 35-year-old, who was in high A ball for us, and felt like, compared to some of the alternatives out there who were willing to accept a high A type hitting offer, that it made sense to keep him around. But he is literally the only coach in our entire minor league system who we did not fire. So fortunately, we had built up a lot of money through some of the trades that we made, getting contracts off our books to be able to afford to do this massive shift of the Los Angeles Angels coaching staff. We did keep scouting director Tim McIlvaine. I like his ratings. He's a favorability type scout, which I never play with, but I don't really want, heading into this very important free agent period where we have close to $100 million to spend, to fire our scouting director 3 weeks before free agency begins and perhaps be flying a little bit blind as far as the free agent class. So we're going to keep McIlvaine around for at least another season. And the focus of this relatively brief episode is going to be a roster review and start planning for the offseason. And as you'll see when we get into the roster review, there's not too many players who are sure to be back with us next year, because we do have a lot of money to spend, and more importantly, we're a really bad team with a lot of bad players that I'm not all that eager to bring back. But we did start off the offseason with one trade that I'd like to talk about. And this was largely driven by the fact that, as we've been thinking about the upcoming potential free agents and the starting pitchers, when we started opening up a lot of money to potentially spend, we were going to go completely wild to bring Dylan Cease on board. Unfortunately, in late August, he suffered a torn UCL, which is going to keep him out of spring training next year. And I just don't know that we're going to be able to justify $23+ million in a multi-year contract for a guy coming off of a torn UCL. So because there's at least one pitcher that we were very interested in who's not available, we took advantage of an opportunity that showed itself from the New York Yankees. Always good to trade with these very wealthy franchises. We traded away Evan White, who we had on a team option, for $10 million. There was absolutely no way that we were going to exercise that. So he was a guy that we were going to cut, but apparently he had a small amount of trade value to the Yankees. Had to trade away minor league pitcher Jackson Rose, who's a guy we signed as a minor league free agent this past year. Happy to do that. The core asset that we actually gave up was Sam Hentges, and you may remember we picked him up when we traded away Travis d'Arnaud, and Hentges was just a pure, maybe the guy will have some value down the line. He was already out for the year with shoulder surgery when we picked him up, but he is a guy who has a solid profile, and over the course of his major league career, he's been a little bit above average in terms of his ERA plus, but well above average in terms of his FIP minus. So he's been a good pitcher, but he's heading into arbitration, and I don't know why. Oh, maybe the Yankees have made him an offer or something. But he was set to make about $3 million in arbitration this year. Oh, I guess he's not technically probably on their 40-man roster yet, since we just made this trade. But felt like guaranteeing him $3 million-ish for next year, when we're not really going to know how he's recovered from this surgery for several more months, was not that compelling to us. And the Yankees had traded for Robbie Ray from the Giants last season, and he was pretty respectable between the two teams. A combined 7-10 record, but an ERA in the low threes overall. Still a competent major league starter, not great, but the important thing was the Yankees retained all of his contract for next year. So he's basically going to be free for us. Do I view Robbie Ray as an ace? Absolutely not. But he's a veteran left-hander who is probably better than most of the guys we had in our rotation last year. And with the fact that Cease is not going to be most likely a realistic option for us, the chance to get Robbie Ray for free for a year, and also the minor league pitcher Luis Serna, who's coming off of elbow ligament reconstruction surgery. Who knows what the 21-year-old is going to look like when he recovers from that, but we think he could be a useful major leaguer down the line. So felt like this was a trade that we had to make. The Yankees also threw in a bunch of cash to us. Like I said, it's always good to make deals with these very wealthy teams that throw money around like nobody's business. Hentges could be a really good reliever going forward, but I think for next season, getting a competent major league starter into our rotation and taking the lottery ticket that is Luis Serna made sense to me, and that's why we made this move. And we'll do a quick review of some of the starters on our roster, and we'll talk primarily about the players who will be back with us next year. Zach Neto had a really good season after he recovered from an injury that sidelined him at the start of the year. 264 average, 17 homers, 52 ribbies, stole 25 bases, ultimately put up a 119 WRC plus and a 2.9 WAR. He's penciled in as our shortstop right now, but certainly could end up playing second or third base for us depending on what happens in the trade market and free agency. The 24-year-old likely to be a cornerstone in what we do going forward. Arbitration eligible for the first time. He's looking for a pretty big contract, so we're probably just going to stick year to year with him through arbitration at this point. First baseman, Nolan Schonel. Bit of a off year for him compared to a year ago. Went from a 2.6 WAR to just 1 win above replacement. The batting average dropped to 229, and he was basically a league average-ish offensive player. Did hit 18 home runs for us and steal 13 bases. Don't view him as a big-time player, but particularly when he's making the major league minimum, a useful guy to be in the mix as a first baseman, corner outfielder, or DH for us. At some time, I would hope that either he improves significantly or the roster gets good enough that 2 or 3 years from now we can move on from him. But still a guy who looks like he's got some room for some improvement, so not ready to let go of him yet. We already talked about Rutschman. He is going to be our catcher next year. Joe Adell led our team with 27 home runs last year, batted just .228, but was a league average offensive player and ended up putting up a 2.3 WAR. Set to make $4.4 million next year in arbitration. Don't love him. He's got solid speed, good home run power. Everything else about him is kind of average-ish or below average, although he's a competent corner outfielder. But for the money he's looking for, and given all the holes that we have on our team, likely we'll bring Adell back next year. Hopefully, we can have him hitting 6th or 7th in the lineup next year instead of the cleanup spot that he took over when we made the trades that we had talked about with the likes of Soler and Moncada and ultimately Trout leaving the team. Logan O'Hoppe had a rough year offensively, was our starting catcher before Rutschman came over. Sent him down to the minors for a month to learn how to play first base, and now he's in the mix as a backup catcher / first baseman / DH. The batting average was a sickly 196 last year, only 12 homers and 393 at-bats. Would expect more home run power given his ratings. The 62 WRC plus, ugly. He was below replacement level when all was said and done. He's arbitration eligible for the first time, making about $1.8 million next year. Did get an interesting idea from Fuller Caleb, given that O'Hoppe's bat is not necessarily the ideal first base bat, and I think we could say the same thing about Nolan Shawnell as well. Fuller Caleb suggested maybe shopping O'Hoppe could be a way, given that he's only 25 years old and he can be a competent major league catcher, to maybe pick up an interesting starting pitcher or starting pitching prospect in return. Not sure exactly what the market's going to look like, but it definitely is worth exploring. And it looks like there's some options out there for him. Drake Baldwin, catcher from the Atlanta Braves, number 8 prospect in all of baseball. I like his defense a little more. He could be a more than competent backup catcher for us behind Rutschman for the next few years, and then maybe take over in the unfortunate event if we were to lose Rutschman. Just doing a quick search through some other players. David Hamilton from the Red Sox, like the glove, love the speed. The bat, not so special. But to be fair, O'Hoppe's bat was not all that special this past year either. Starting pitching prospect Jonathan Cannon. Looks like he could be a competent major league starter. He's been in the majors with the White Sox the last 2 years. Was pretty effective in the majors this past season after a rough stretch in AAA. Trying to just jump in if I see any younger players who look more interesting. Tanner Bibby, another guy, a competent major league starter, 10-12 with a 3.64 ERA last year. Headed to arbitration for the first time, but $3.6 million is not going to be a crippling number for the 26-year-old right-hander. That might be something to think about. Yainer Diaz from the Astros, not going to draw a lot of walks, but he just somehow won the American League batting title with a .325 batting average last year. That's kind of out of nowhere. So there are certainly options if we wanted to move on from O'Hoppe. If we wanted to go a little more expensive and older, Freddie Peralta, respectable major league pitcher who seems to win double digits every year. Another younger guy, Zebby Matthews of the Twins. None of these guys that were being offered are aces. Ooh, here's a guy who's at least got some potential upside. 23-year-old Ben Hess from the Yankees organization. Number 36 prospect in baseball. Split last year between A ball, high A. Actually split last year between rookie ball, A, high A, and double A. So a lot of progression through the Yankees farm system last year for the 23-year-old out of Alabama. But he looks like he could be a pretty decent pitcher if he reaches his full potential. Could also take on Carlos Rodon's contract or Clark Schmidt if we wanted to. A lot of older pitchers from the Mets, Gossman, Holmes, Minaya. Brandon Marsh, if we wanted a left fielder. Not all that exciting in terms of his bat. But you can see there's definitely a lot of options out there for O'Hoppe if we wanted to move on from him. Luis Garcia Jr. of the Nationals, pretty good contact hitting second baseman who's hit .282 and .286 his last 2 seasons in the majors. So definitely something we will consider. Not going to make a decision right now, but I do think that was an interesting idea from Fuller Caleb, and we'll continue to explore whether maybe if we packaged O'Hoppe with someone even a little better, maybe we can get a player we like a little bit more. Could see some more turnover on our outfield. Taylor Ward hit 19 homers for us last year, but when all was said and done, he was a league average offensive player, slightly above replacement level, and he's going to be 32 years old next year, set to make around $9.5 million in arbitration. There aren't necessarily a lot of great options for us in our outfield. The only guy that I have penciled in to come back for sure next year is Adele, but Ward at that money is not all that intriguing to me. Tougher decision to me is Jake Fraley. He's also arbitration eligible, set to make less money, $6 million. Fraley, solid defensive corner outfielder, good speed, good bunter. The bat is not particularly impressive, but the crazy thing about Fraley is that a 30-year-old. He put up a 4.1 WAR between our Angels team and the Reds. He had never even reached a 2 WAR before in all of his previous major league seasons with Seattle and Cincinnati. 313 average and a ridiculous 162 WRC plus while he was with us. Looking at what he's done over the major league career that he's had thus far and looking at his actual ratings, it's hard to imagine he'll be close to as good next season as he was with us for the final couple months of this year. But at $6 million with all the money that we've got left to spend, maybe we take a flyer on him and bring him back. Kevin Newman almost certainly will not be back. Good influence in the clubhouse and good defensively, but an ugly 41 WRC plus, almost a win below replacement level, and just doesn't really look like a major league hitter at this point. Speaking of guys who don't look like major league hitters, Brooks Lee is a guy we picked up in a trade. I believe it was the Soler trade. 24-year-old, versatile defensively, hit only .219 with a 50 WRC plus, and he was also about a win below replacement level for us. Given that he's making the major league minimum for the time being, he'll likely be on our roster next year. The question is whether it'll be as like a starting second or third baseman, or perhaps as a utility infielder. In a perfect world, I'd love to have Brooks Lee back in a utility infielder type of role rather than something more prominent. Yasmani Grandal was a rental, certainly won't look to be bringing him back. Scott Kingery split the year between AAA and the majors. No real urgency to bring him back either. Same thing about Tim Anderson, who looks completely washed. Hit .216 and 185 at-bats for us and ended up spending the rest of the year on the bench. Gustavo Campero did hit .269 for us and 193 at-bats. He's a guy with 2 option years left. Could have him back fighting for a outfield spot. And then 24-year-old Matthew Lugo made his major league debut late in the year, hit .216 and 51 at-bats. Was very productive in AAA Salt Lake. Like the captain personality, respectable defensively, decent speed. Not a prototypical corner outfielder major league bat. But given that right now we only have one outfielder, Joe Adele, that we think is going to be on the major league roster, Lugo certainly seems like a guy who could be in the mix for a 4th or 5th outfield spot for us next season. And pitching, unfortunately, given that we had the most runs allowed in all of the American League last year, is similar to our position players in that I don't know that a lot of these guys are going to be back. We already talked about the recent acquisition of Robbie Ray, so he'll be a starter for us next year. The only other guy who will be sure to be back is all-star Reed Detmers, 10-8 with a 3.16 ERA. Led the league with a .236 BABIP against him, put up a 2.2 WAR for us. His ERA plus well above average, although his FIP minus was actually slightly below average. But he is a guy who's not looking to make a ton of money, around $4 million next year in arbitration. He was by far our most competent major league starter this year, and given that we had a very bad pitching staff and we've got a lot of holes to fill, Detmers and Ray are the two guys that we're pretty confident will be in our rotation next year. Jose Soriano, probably in the mix to be in the rotation again. 5-10 with a 4.31 ERA and a 1 WAR. Does not blow anybody away, but he is a guy that can still reach triple digits and blow people away on the mound from that perspective. Struck out a little over a batter per inning for us this year, and set to make just $2.2 million. Given the dearth of pitching we have, wouldn't think that it's impossible that we pencil Jose Soriano in as a fifth starter for us next year. Chase Silseth is a guy who's set to make the major league minimum again next year. He does also still have 3 option years left. 7-11 with a 5.20 ERA. He was below replacement level. He will almost certainly be part of our organization next year. Our hope would be that we are able to upgrade the pitching staff enough that he's either in AAA or in a long relief role in the bullpen rather than someone who's starting 31 games for us. But we'll have to see how the trade markets and the free agent markets evolve. Lefty Sammy Matera, 25-year-old who just finally made his major league debut with us, 1-4 with an 8.44 ERA. Another guy making the major league minimum who has 3 option years left, so he'll probably be on the 40-man roster. The hope is that he won't be on the 26-man roster, but we'll see what happens. And Rosny Contreras, traded for him from Baltimore in that big trade for Mike Trout, where we also got back Rutschman. He was fantastic with Baltimore, 11-1 with a 2.48 ERA. He was pretty bad with us, though, 3-6 with a 5.59 ERA, and he allowed 9 home runs over 48 and a third innings. Take some solace in that his Sierra was actually a little lower with us than it was with Baltimore. He was still slightly above replacement level. Set to make about $3 million in arbitration next year. It's crazy because he was an all-star with Baltimore before they traded him to us. Very effective out of the bullpen for them. He was disastrous as a starting pitcher for us. It's crazy to think that a team with a pitching staff as poor as ours wouldn't consider bringing back a guy who was an all-star and a combined 14-7 with a 3.65 ERA last year, but he was so ineffective with us, I'm at least having second thoughts. My hunch is we probably will bring him back, and in a perfect scenario, would love for him to kind of be a long or middle reliever for us and more of an emergency starter than a everyday starter, since he seemed much more effective in that bullpen role for Baltimore last year than he was in our rotation. Kenley Jansen spent a year with us as a closer, saved 41 games. He's looking for big money again. Actually, not big money, not as much as I thought, only $3.2 million a year. So I really thought he was going to be looking for a crazy amount, but he is 38 years old at this point. He's a fan favorite. At that dollar price, I think we kind of have to consider bringing him back just because we've got so many holes on this pitching staff. But it's conceivable that he would not be the closer anymore, as if we move on from Jensen, or perhaps even if we do bring Jensen back, I think might give 25-year-old Ben Joyce that opportunity. He had a 3.33 ERA for us last year, 10.6 strikeouts per 9 innings, above average ERA plus and FIP minus, and 31 shutdowns to 10 meltdowns for us. We've actually made a 6-year contract offer to him. He wasn't looking for crazy money, still kind of views himself as a bullpen pitcher, even though we noted that in a possible scenario when we move him to the prime role out of the bullpen is the closer. He's a guy who throws over 100-mile-an-hour, extreme ground ball tendencies, and he wasn't looking for crazy money. So we're hoping to lock up Joyce for the medium term with the offer that we've just made to him. I can show you the terms of that here. $13.5 million for 6 years. Now it's buying out some very cheap arbitration eligible years, and I think it was actually still buying out a minimum salary year next year, but still thought for a player with his skill set that was a deal that needed to be made, or at least attempted to be made. And you can see as far as the arbitration eligible players, we've made offers to Detmers, Rutschman, and Neto. Still have a lot of other decisions to make on some lesser players. The rest of the bullpen, not great. Voth was a rental, was not great with us, and he will likely be moving on. Looking for only $1.6 million, but he's basically an average right-handed major league reliever. I guess that price isn't unreasonable, but we'd like to kind of try to upgrade. Garrett McDaniels, the lefty, will certainly be in the mix to be with us next year. 4.26 ERA when he made his debut this season, over 31 2/3 innings. Lefty making the major league minimum, still has minor league options. Jose De Leon, minor league free agent signing right before the season started, and he was respectable for us. 4.08 ERA over 79 1/3 innings pitched. The issue is he's arbitration eligible now, set to be making about $2 million. Loved him as a minor league free agent. Liked him as a guy making the major league minimum, tripling his salary at the age of 33 for a pretty generic right-handed reliever, though. Doesn't excite me that much. Now, the one thing positive, I can kind of say about De Leon is that he could be a guy, a fifth starter for us. He's got enough stamina to kind of be a 5-inning guy, or could be an emergency starter for us if we stashed him in the bullpen. And Jose Suarez, a similar situation, 5.13 ERA over 94 2/3 innings, so he wasn't good last year. The 27-year-old set to make about $2.5 million. Another guy who could be an emergency starter for us, but in a perfect world, we'd rather have him working out of the bullpen, or honestly, in a perfect world, he wouldn't be on our team at all. But a more realistic scenario for him might be a lefty bullpen arm rather than a starter. And a couple other pitchers that we'll touch upon. Chris Stratton sent to be a free agent. We had to take him back when we traded away Anthony Rendon's contract, as Kansas City didn't want to spend $4.5 million on him this past year. He was actually good for us with a 3.21 ERA, but he's 35 years old. His stuff is not good. Certainly not someone we're looking to bring back. Hans Kraus, another guy we'll be moving on from. He's only got 1 year, 46 days of major league experience, but he's out of options. Brutal control, just not the profile of a pitcher that I want on my team. AJ Block, 27-year-old left-hander. Block is a guy who does have 3 option years left, making the major league minimum. He was respectable for us last year. Would expect that he'll be back in a left-handed reliever role. And he is also, with 40 stamina and 3 pitches, a guy who we could start if we had to, although I wouldn't expect him to be particularly effective. And the last guy to touch on quickly is Brock Burke, another guy set to hit arbitration again, $1.5 million. Pretty generic left-handed reliever profile. Was horrible for us this past year with an ERA of close to 6 and 15 home runs allowed in just 65 2/3 innings. Tend to think we'll move on from him, but we got a lot of holes that we're going to need to fill on this pitching staff, so it ultimately is going to be questionable how selective we really can be with some of these marginal guys. hopefully when all is said and done, we'll have fewer marginal pitchers and fewer marginal position players on this roster next year than we did this past season. And I guess the last thing I'll check in on before the episode is finished is another potential trade. Would love to know what you thought about who was offered for O'Hoppe. But Nolan Schanuel, another guy who's not a prototypical first baseman. They're very different players. Schanuel more of a contact and draw a walk guy, whereas O'Hoppe is really about the home run power and kind of pretty average in terms of everything else. Clearly, in a perfect world, you'd hope that your first baseman hit more than I think either of these guys is going to hit. Schanuel, still is, I think, in real baseball considered a pretty decent prospect. And clearly, if he was able to continue improving his gap power, his home run power, and his eye, could become a pretty effective major league hitter. But we will shop him around as well just to see how the market for him shapes up relative to O'Hoppe. I think ultimately Schanuel has a little more offensive potential, but O'Hoppe, with the fact that he's a catcher, has a pretty interesting value. And it looks like, similar to O'Hoppe, a lot of different options that we could trade Schanuel for. But as I kind of expected, at a very high level, I think you could probably argue that O'Hoppe had a little bit more value, even though there's some different names being offered for both of these players. Yeah, it seems like the market is not quite as strong for Schanuel as it was for O'Hoppe, and definitely not quite as deep in terms of the number of teams that were interested in the level of players that they were offering. But they are two guys who have some trade value, so I think between now and the next episode, probably going to spend some time seeing if maybe there's a pitcher or two that we can pick up in the trade market. We don't have a ton of assets, as I've talked about. The cupboard is pretty bare as far as quality major leaguers on this team, but the positive thing is that we don't have a lot of salary obligations for next year. The biggest is the 70% of Rendon's contract that we retained, and $11 million from Robert Bob Stevenson, who's going to miss a good chunk of next year recovering from surgery. So never a positive thing when your two top salaries are a guy who's no longer with your team and a guy who's unlikely to play significant baseball next year. But I still think we've ultimately found ourselves in a better situation than we were at when I took this team over in March. Although the roster isn't better because the roster is really bare at this point, I'd say we're in a better situation simply because we've got a lot of money to attack the free agent market with. One final quick look at the top prospective free agents, and we hope that none of these guys end up getting signed by their current teams. Kyle Tucker, to me, is a really interesting option given how weak we are in the outfield right now. Certainly going to be looking for some good money, expected to be making about $36 million a year, but we've got money to spend. Vlad Guerrero Jr. would clearly be a excellent offensive player to add into the mix. We would certainly need to trade away Schanuel or O'Hoppe, and possibly both of them if we really wanted to open up first base for him, since neither of those two is an ideal designated hitter. But there are some other options out there. Alex Bregman at third base. Bo Bichette could play infield for us. Cody Bellinger, Pete Alonso, Jock Peterson, Josh Naylor. A lot of first basemen out there. Ryan O'Hearn. Don't know outside of Vlad Guerrero Jr. and I think Kyle Tucker to a bit lesser extent. And I guess you got to put Jock Peterson into the mix with the 65 power and the 60 eye. Did hit a combined 35 homers and 97 ribbies last year for the Diamondbacks and the Rangers. But other than those three, I don't know that there's any true impact bats. But there's certainly guys who could help this roster. So I could see us going for a couple of $15 million player types, and maybe layer in one of the real big guys in terms of Guerrero and Tucker to at least get us to the point where we've got a few respectable major league hitters on this team. Pitching wise, we talked about the starters, and with Cease, I don't want to say off the market, but with us unlikely to be spending $24 million on a guy recovering from surgery, I'd say some of the more realistic options could be, the former Yankees, a Nestor Cortez, a Michael King. Don't love $20 million a year for those guys, but that's kind of the going price, unfortunately. Brandon Woodruff looks like he might be a little cheaper. He could be an interesting guy. Kind of depends how many years he wants as a 32-year-old. But if he was only looking for a 3-year deal or something in the $15 million range, that could give us a competent major leaguer. Ranger Suarez and Dustin May are also competent major league pitchers. I just don't know when you think about Suarez, King, May, Cortez, if any of these guys are really worth $20 million plus a season, but that's the price on the open market and free agency, and I'm sure we're not the only team that's going to be looking for pitchers, so some interesting decisions ahead of us. The hope would be that maybe between now and the next episode we can find a pitcher somehow in the trade market that we really like. Unfortunately, when we think about our farm system, it is not particularly robust, ranking 21st overall, 3 top 100 prospects now. Sam Aldegheri didn't pitch in the majors for us this past year, 8-12 with an ERA of close to 7 in AAA, but probably a guy who we have to give a shot to in the not too distant future. Christian Moore ended up spending the whole year in AA. I know I had talked in previous episodes about potentially trying to promote him, but he ended up being basically a league average player in AA and just never really made a strong case for promotion. We did get him trained to play some other positions last year to make him more versatile defensively. Doesn't necessarily look like he's going to be a big-time offensive player, but certainly has a profile with a lot of versatility defensively, and he's solid in the outfield and certainly respectable at multiple infield positions with a bat that's borderline respectable. Would think that he'll be up with the big club maybe as a September call-up next year. And then our top 2 prospects are Sean Gamble, our first-round pick from this past season, and Evan Crest, second-round pick out of Jacksonville University, who went 4-2 with a 3.59 ERA and A-ball. Hopefully we can continue moving him along next year, and maybe by the 2027 season at some point, Crest will be ready to help us. But the minor league system is not all that bountiful, so I think it's going to be pretty tough for us to pick up a true impact pitcher given the dearth of talent in the minor league system and the fact that outside of potentially an O'Hoppe or a Shawnell, we don't really have any younger major leaguers that are going to have any particular value to others. So I think we've put the team in a better situation than when we've started, but we'll know for sure how I feel about that after we get through this upcoming free agency period. And as I said, it's not inconceivable that we'll have done a trade or two before the next episode, but next time around we'll talk about any trades that we make, review any real interesting feedback on our options from the worldwide scouting department, and then hopefully get to the start of free agency, and who knows, maybe even sign a big player or two before the end of the next episode. And we'll find out the answer to all of those questions and suppositions that I just put forth in that next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.